The August sun beat down on Red Hollow like a hammer on an anvil, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust and misery. Mara Quinn stood on the auction platform with her head high, even though every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like livestock, while men with tobacco-stained teeth appraised her worth. She was the last one left. The others, 3 women and 2 young men, had already been claimed. Work contracts, they called them. Indentured service. Pretty words for ugly business. But everyone knew what it really was. When you had nothing, when the world had chewed you up and spit you out, you sold the only thing left, yourself. "Do I hear 8 silver?" The auctioneer's voice cracked like old leather. Samuel Hendricks had been running these sales for 15 years, ever since the territorial government had made them legal. Strong back, good teeth, no visible disease. "She got a temper, though," someone called from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the assembled men. "Broke Johnny Reardon's nose last month when he tried to collect a kiss." "Johnny deserved worse than that," Mara said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. More laughter, but darker now, edged with something mean. Samuel cleared his throat. 7 silver, then. She can cook, clean, handle livestock." "Can't handle her own damn mouth," another voice interrupted. "Why would any man want that trouble?" Mara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and remote, indifferent to the small cruelties of small people. She'd come to Red Hollow 6 months ago with nothing but a canvas bag and a head full of desperate hope. The drought had killed her family's farm 2 territories east. Her father had died of fever that winter. Her mother had followed him 3 weeks later, and Mara had buried them both in ground so hard she'd broken 2 shovels digging their graves. She'd walked for 43 days to reach Red Hollow, following rumors of work, of opportunity, of a chance to start over. Instead, she'd found a town that measured human worth in silver coins and judged women by how quiet they kept their suffering. 6 silver, Samuel said, desperation creeping into his voice. An auctioneer who couldn't move his goods looked weak, and weakness in Red Hollow was a currency that bought you nothing but contempt. 6 silver for a healthy woman of working age. 4, someone offered. And that's generous. Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. $4 silver, that was what they paid for a lame horse, for a wagon with a broken axle, for things that were already broken and would probably break worse before they got better. 4.5, Samuel countered weakly. Surely 3. A different voice now, younger, cruel with the special viciousness of men who've discovered they can hurt someone weaker than themselves. 3 silver, and I'll take her off your hands. Could use someone to scrub floors at the saloon. The crowd knew what that meant. Everyone knew what happened to women who scrubbed floors at the Last Dollar saloon. Mara's hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw blood. 3 silver, Samuel said, and the defeat in his voice made Mara hate him almost as much as she hated the men in the crowd. Going once? 5. The word dropped into the square like a stone into still water, and the ripples of silence spread outward in concentric rings of shock. Every head turned toward the back of the crowd, where a man stood in the shadow of the general store's awning. Silas Boone. Even in a town that specialized in hard men, Silas was different. He stood 6'4", broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested not just strength, but violence, held in careful check. His face was weathered dark by sun and wind, carved into angles that gave nothing away. Black hair shot through with silver fell past his collar, and his eyes, pale gray like winter ice, swept across the crowd with the detached interest of a predator watching prey that wasn't worth the effort of hunting. He lived alone in the mountains, 15 miles from town, and came down maybe once every 2 months for supplies. The stories about him multiplied in his absence, grew teeth and claws in the retelling. Some said he'd been a soldier who'd killed his entire unit in a rage. Others claimed he'd murdered a man in a duel back east and fled west with a price on his head. A few whispered that he wasn't entirely human, that he'd made some dark bargain with forces that lived in the deep places of the mountains. The truth was simpler and somehow more unsettling. Nobody knew anything about Silas Boone except that he wanted to be left alone. And men who didn't respect that wish tended to return to town with broken bones and a newfound appreciation for solitude. 5 silver, Silas repeated, stepping forward into the sunlight. He moved like water, like violence that had learned patience. Cash payment, immediate possession. Samuel Hendricks licked his lips nervously. Well, Mr. Boone, there was a previous bid of 3, which I'm beating by 2 full dollars. Silas's voice was quiet, but it carried. Unless someone wants to go higher. The young man who'd offered 3 silver suddenly found the dirt at his feet fascinating. The rest of the crowd shuffled and muttered, but no one spoke. Bidding against Silas Boone was the kind of stupid that got you hurt. 5 silver it is, Samuel said quickly. Sold to Mr. Boone. Payment accepted, contract transferred. I don't want a contract. Silas pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted out 5 silver dollars onto Samuel's outstretched palm. I'm buying her outright. Full purchase. No term limit. No binding agreement. She's free to leave whenever she wants. A collective murmur ran through the crowd. That wasn't how this worked. Work contracts lasted a year minimum, sometimes 5. You bought labor, bought control, bought the right to extract value from someone who had nothing left to sell but their body and their time. You didn't buy someone and then immediately offer them freedom. Samuel looked at the money, then at Silas, then at Mara. That's irregular. It's also legal, Silas said flatly. Territorial Code, Section 47. Any purchased labor contract can be nullified by mutual agreement at time of sale. I'm offering her that choice right now, in front of witnesses. He turned those pale eyes on Mara for the first time. You want to stay in Red Hollow? Find work on your own terms. You're welcome to take my 5 silver and walk away. Nobody here will bother you again. Mara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a trick. Had to be. Men like Silas Boone didn't spend money out of kindness. Nobody did. And if I come with you? She heard herself ask. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Then you work for your keep. Food, shelter, fair treatment. You pull your weight, I pull mine. When you want to leave, you leave. Simple as that. Nothing's that simple. No, he agreed, but it's as close as you'll get in this world. Mara looked at the crowd, at their suspicious faces and hungry eyes, at Samuel Hendricks with his weak smile and weaker spine, at the dusty street of Red Hollow and the false promises it represented. She thought about the Last Dollar Saloon and the women who scrubbed its floors. She thought about her parents, buried in hard ground 2 territories away, and the 43 days she'd walked to reach this nowhere town that had measured her worth at 3 silver dollars. She thought about the mountains in the distance, purple and remote and free. I'll come with you, she said. Silas nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Get your things. This is everything. Mara gestured to the clothes on her back, the worn boots on her feet. She'd sold her canvas bag 2 weeks ago for food money. I'm ready. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing past her defiant posture, past the careful mask she wore, down to the exhausted, desperate woman beneath. But all he said was, then let's go. He turned and walked toward a horse tied at the edge of the square, a massive roan gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Mara followed, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement, every whispered comment that followed in her wake. She's dead by winter, someone muttered, if she lasts that long. Crazy mountain man and his new pet. That'll end well. Silas swung into the saddle with the ease of long practice, then extended his hand down to her. Mara hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This was it, the point of no return. Then grasped his forearm and let him pull her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his coat, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Hold on, he said, and urged the horse forward. Red Hollow fell away behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. Mara looked back once, saw the crowd already dispersing, already forgetting her, already moving on to the next small cruelty, the next casual tragedy. In a week, she'd be nothing but a story they told over drinks. Remember that mouthy woman who got sold to Silas Boone? Wonder whatever happened to her. She turned her face forward and watched the mountains grow larger with each mile. They rode in silence for over an hour, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. The air grew cooler, cleaner, sharp with the scent of pine and cedar. The sun climbed higher, but the shade of the trees kept the worst of the heat at bay. Mara's legs ached from gripping the horse's flanks, her arms tired from holding on, but she didn't complain. Complaining implied weakness, and weakness in this world got you sold for $3 silver. Finally, Silas spoke. "You know how to shoot?" The question caught her off guard. "Rifle or pistol?" "Either. My father taught me. We had coyotes back home, sometimes wolves. I can hit what I aim at." "Good." He was quiet for another few minutes, then added, "You know how to keep a house? Cook, clean, basic maintenance?" "I'm not domestic help," Mara said sharply. "If that's what you're expecting—" "I'm expecting someone who can pull their weight," Silas interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I don't need a maid. I need someone who won't die the first time winter comes down hard or a bear gets curious about the henhouse. I'm asking what skills you have so I know what you can do and what I need to teach you." Mara felt her defensive anger deflate slightly. "I can cook, basic stuff, nothing fancy. I can clean, mend clothes, tend animals. My mother taught me to preserve food, smoking meat, pickling vegetables, that sort of thing. I'm a hard worker. I don't quit when things get difficult." "That last part's the most important," Silas said. "The rest we can figure out as we go." They crested a ridge, and suddenly the world opened up before them. The valley below was a sweep of green meadow bordered by dense forest, with a stream cutting through its center like a silver ribbon. And there, nestled against the tree line, stood a cabin. It was larger than Mara had expected, not the rough shack she'd imagined, but a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Beyond it, she could see a barn, a chicken coop, what looked like a workshop, and a small corral where 2 horses grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. "This is home," Silas said simply. They descended the ridge on a switchback trail, and as they drew closer, Mara could see the care that had gone into the place. The logs were fitted tight, the chinking fresh. The porch had been swept clean, and firewood was stacked in neat rows against the cabin wall. A vegetable garden flourished to one side, rows of beans and squash and tomatoes thriving despite the late summer heat. This wasn't the lair of a madman or a monster. This was a home built by someone who understood the value of order, of preparation, of making something that would last. Silas dismounted and helped her down, then led the horse to the barn. Mara stood in the middle of the yard, suddenly uncertain. In Red Hollow, she'd known the rules, even if she'd hated them. Here, she had no idea what was expected of her. Silas emerged from the barn and gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll show you around." The interior was as neat as the exterior. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the hearth, and shelves lined with books. Books. Mara couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so many books in one place. Her eyes caught titles. Shakespeare, Plutarch, Darwin, something by John Stuart Mill. "You read?" Silas asked, watching her. "When I can," Mara admitted. "We didn't have many books growing up. My mother had a Bible and a collection of Grimm's fairy tales. I read them both so many times I could recite them from memory." "Help yourself to whatever you want." He pointed to a door at the back of the room. "That's my room. This one," he indicated another door, "is yours. It's small, but it's private. You'll have your own space." Mara opened the door and found a narrow room with a single window, a bed frame strung with rope and topped with a corn-husk mattress, a small dresser, and a washstand. Simple, austere, but clean. And hers. Actually, hers, with a door that closed and a lock on the inside. She turned back to find Silas watching her with an unreadable expression. "Why?" she asked. The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. "Why did you buy me? Why bring me here?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because I remember what it's like to be worth nothing in someone else's eyes. And I remember wishing someone had stepped in when I was drowning." He moved to the fireplace, began adding wood to the banked coals. "I'm not a good man, Mara. Don't mistake this for charity or kindness. I need help, and you need a place. That's the transaction, but I won't work you like a slave. and I won't put my hands on you unless you ask me to. Those are my only promises." "That's more than anyone else offered," Mara said quietly. "Low bar to clear." He straightened, dusting ash from his hands. "You hungry?" She was starving. She'd eaten nothing but half a potato yesterday and some hardtack the day before. But admitting hunger felt like admitting weakness, and old habits died hard. "I can wait." "Don't be stupid." There was no cruelty in his voice, just blunt practicality. "We eat at sundown, but there's bread and cheese in the larder if you need something now. Take it. You're no good to me if you collapse from hunger." Mara found the larder, a cool room built partially underground, stocked with preserved food, hanging meat, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. She cut herself a thick slice of bread and a wedge of sharp white cheese, then ate standing up, too tired to maintain pretenses. The food was simple but good, and she felt strength returning to her limbs with each bite. When she emerged, Silas was gone. She found him outside, working in the garden, pulling weeds with methodical efficiency. For a long moment, she just watched him, trying to reconcile the fearsome reputation with the man carefully tending tomato plants. "You going to stand there or make yourself useful?" he asked without looking up. Mara smiled despite herself and joined him in the dirt. The days developed a rhythm. Mara woke before dawn to find Silas already up, coffee made, breakfast started. They ate together in comfortable silence, then divided the day's work between them. He took the heavier tasks, chopping wood, repairing the barn roof, hunting, while she handled the cooking, the garden, the chickens. But the division wasn't absolute. He taught her to maintain the firearms, to track game, to recognize signs of weather changes in the behavior of animals and the shape of clouds. She taught him better ways to preserve vegetables, how to make bread that didn't taste like sawdust, the trick to getting stubborn stains out of fabric. They spoke little, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was the comfortable quiet of two people who didn't need words to fill every moment, who understood that sometimes work was its own conversation. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Mara felt muscle developing in her arms and shoulders from the hard physical labor. Her hands, soft from months of unemployment in Red Hollow, calloused over. The constant knot of anxiety in her stomach began to loosen, replaced by something she barely recognized. Peace. But peace was fragile, and the past had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran. It was a Tuesday evening, the sun just beginning its descent behind the mountains, when Mara heard the sound of an approaching horse. She was in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer squash, and she straightened at the sound, instinctively alert. Silas emerged from the barn, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Who is it?" "Don't know yet. Inside. Now." Mara obeyed, but she didn't go far. She stood just inside the doorway, watching through the gap as a rider crested the ridge. The man was old, bent in the saddle, leading a pack mule behind him. As he drew closer, Mara could see he wore the dusty black suit of a circuit preacher, though the Bible in his saddlebag looked more like a formality than a conviction. "Mr. Boone," the man called out, his voice thin and reedy. "Name's Josiah Kerr. I'm no threat to you, just passing through on my way to Silver Creek." Silas didn't move his hand from his pistol. "Silver Creek's north of here. You're headed east." Took a detour. Josiah dismounted stiffly, keeping his hands visible. "I have a message for you, or rather, a delivery." "I didn't order anything." Nevertheless, Josiah moved to the pack mule and began unlashing something wrapped in a blanket. "This came to me 3 days ago in Red Hollow. Woman on her deathbed asked me to bring it to you, said you were the only one who could keep him safe." He pulled back the blanket and Mara's heart stopped. It was a child. A boy, maybe 4 years old, with dark curls and wide, frightened eyes. Dirt smudged his face, and his clothes hung loose on his thin frame. But he was alive, conscious, staring at the strange adults with the wary stillness of prey that knows it's been spotted. "I don't know any woman who'd send me a child," Silas said, but his voice had changed, gone careful and cold. "She didn't give me her name. Just said to tell you—" Josiah paused, searching his memory. "She said to tell you that blood debts run deep and this one's owed in full. She said you'd understand." Mara watched Silas's face and saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe, or old pain rising to the surface. His hand fell away from his pistol, and he took a step toward the child. "What's his name?" Silas asked. "Eli," Josiah said. "The woman called him Eli." Mara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the boy with the dark curls and the frightened eyes, the boy who'd been taken from her 13 months ago by men with guns and badges and legal papers that said she had no right to keep him. Eli. Her son. Not by blood, but by everything that mattered. She'd found him in the burned ruins of a settler's wagon, his real mother dead in the massacre, his father, whoever he'd been, long gone. She'd carried him for 3 days through hostile territory, fed him from her own meager rations, sang to him when he cried, promised him he'd be safe. And then the territorial authorities had found them, had taken him, had told her she had no legal claim, no rights, no standing. Just another piece of property to be redistributed to proper families with proper paperwork. She'd thought she'd never see him again. Had mourned him like a death, had carried that grief west with her like a stone in her chest. And now he was here. "Mara?" Silas's voice cut through her paralysis. He was looking at her, really looking at her, and she knew he could see everything written on her face. The shock, the grief, the desperate, fragile hope. "I know him," she whispered. "That's Eli. He's mine." Josiah's eyebrows rose. The woman said, "I don't care what she said." Mara pushed past Silas and dropped to her knees in front of the boy. "Eli, do you remember me? It's Mara. I took care of you after the wagons." Eli stared at her for a long moment, his small face scrunched in concentration. Then, tentatively, he reached out and touched her hair. "Mara," he whispered. "Sing the bird song." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She'd sung him a silly song about mockingbirds and morning glories, had used it to soothe him when he woke screaming from nightmares of fire and blood. "You remember." "Sing it," Eli insisted, and his lower lip trembled. So Mara sang, her voice cracking and unsteady, and Eli climbed into her lap and buried his face in her shoulder, and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and strange. Josiah cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I'll leave him here then. The woman said you'd know what to do." "What woman?" Silas demanded. "I need a name." "She was dying, Mr. Boone. Fever by the look of it. She didn't have the strength for full introductions." Josiah mounted his horse stiffly. "She just said the boy needed protection, and you were the only one fierce enough to provide it. Whether that's true or not, I can't say, but I've delivered him, and my conscience is clear." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to all of you. You're going to need it." He rode away, leading the pack mule, and disappeared over the ridge. Silence settled over the clearing, broken only by Eli's quiet sobbing and Mara's whispered reassurances. Finally, Silas spoke. "Inside, both of you. We need to talk." Mara carried Eli into the cabin and sat with him in the rocking chair by the fire. He clung to her like a burr, his small fingers twisted in her shirt, and she held him and rocked him and felt the stone in her chest crack open and bleed out something that felt dangerously close to joy. Silas built up the fire, put a kettle on for tea, then sat across from them at the table. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start at the beginning." So Mara told him about the wagon train she'd been traveling with, how they'd come across the burned wreckage of another settlement, how everyone else had wanted to keep moving but she'd heard a child crying. Told him about finding Eli hidden under his mother's body, about the 3 days she'd spent keeping him alive while working her way to the nearest town. Told him about the authorities who'd taken him, who'd said she had no legal standing, no proof of relationship, no right to claim a child who belonged to the territory now. "They said they'd find him a proper family," Mara finished bitterly. "Said I was unfit, no husband, no home, no prospects, just another frontier drifter with no business raising a child." "But someone gave him back to you," Silas said thoughtfully, "or at least tried to. This woman Josiah mentioned. Any idea who she might have been?" Mara shook her head. "There were a dozen families in the town where they took him. I don't know who adopted him or where they went. I tried to find out, but—" She swallowed hard. "I had no money, no legal recourse. I had to let him go." "Blood debts run deep," Silas murmured, repeating the dying woman's message. Someone thought they owed you, or maybe someone thought I owed them. He stood, paced to the window, stared out at the darkening valley. Either way, this is going to bring trouble. The kind of trouble that doesn't go away quietly. I won't let them take him again, Mara said fiercely. I don't care what the law says. He's mine. The law doesn't care what you think is right. Silas turned to face her, and his expression was grim. They'll come looking for him. Whoever had custody, whoever was responsible, when he turns up missing, they'll trace him here. And when they do, they'll have legal authority to take him back. Then what do we do? Silas was quiet for a long moment. We prepare, he said finally. We make this place defensible. We stockpile supplies, and we hope like hell that whoever's coming is willing to be reasonable. He paused. But we also prepare for the possibility that they won't be. Mara looked down at Eli, now sleeping in her arms, his face peaceful for the first time since his arrival. She thought about the men in Red Hollow, about the way they'd measured her worth in silver coins. She thought about the authorities who'd taken Eli the first time, who'd treated a child's life like property to be redistributed according to bureaucratic convenience. And she thought about Silas, who'd paid $5 silver for her freedom and asked for nothing in return except honest work, who'd built a home in the wilderness and filled it with books and quiet dignity, who was now promising to stand between her and the world. Thank you, she said quietly. Silas nodded once. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start fortifying. If trouble's coming, I want to be ready. But trouble, when it came, wore a badge and carried legal papers, and it arrived far sooner than any of them expected. Dawn broke cold and sharp over the valley, painting the eastern sky in shades of copper and rust. Mara woke to the sound of hammering, her body stiff from a night spent in the rocking chair with Eli curled against her chest. She'd been afraid to move, afraid that if she let go of him even for a moment, he might vanish like smoke, like some cruel dream her exhausted mind had conjured. But he was real. His small heart beat steady against her ribs, and his breath came warm and even against her neck. Real, solid, hers again, after 13 months of grief so profound it had hollowed her out from the inside. The hammering continued, methodical and purposeful. Mara eased Eli onto the chair, tucking a blanket around him, and stepped outside to find Silas on the roof of the barn, securing additional planks across the loft door. "What are you doing?" she called up. He didn't pause in his work. "Making it harder to burn us out. That loft door was always a weak point. Too much exposure, too easy to reach with a torch. I'm reinforcing it, adding a metal grate behind the wood." He drove another nail home with 3 precise strikes. "You know how to use a rifle? I told you I could shoot. I'm asking if you can kill a man if you have to." He looked down at her then, his pale eyes flat and serious in the early light. "Because that's what it might come to. I need to know if you'll hesitate." Mara thought about the men who'd taken Eli from her, about the casual cruelty in their eyes as they'd pried his screaming body from her arms. She thought about the territorial judge who'd signed the papers without ever looking at her face, who'd treated her love like it was worthless simply because she lacked the proper documentation. "I won't hesitate," she said. Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. There's a Winchester in the cabinet by my bed, already loaded. Keep it close. If riders come and I'm not here, you get Eli into the root cellar. There's a false wall at the back. Push on the 3rd stone from the left, waist height. It opens to a tunnel that comes out about 50 yards into the tree line. You take that tunnel and you run, and you don't look back. Understand?" "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." He climbed down from the roof with the easy grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime working at heights. "But it won't come to that, not if we're smart. You keep saying when they come, not if they come. You sound certain." "I am certain." Silas walked to the workshop and emerged with a box of ammunition, which he began distributing to various locations around the property: the barn, the woodshed, a hollowed-out fence post near the garden. A child doesn't just disappear without consequences. Someone will be looking for him, and they'll ask questions, and those questions will lead here. Maybe in a week, maybe in a month, but they'll come. Then maybe we should leave. Take Eli and go somewhere they'll never find us. You want to spend the rest of your life running, looking over your shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to build something real? Silas shook his head. That's not living. That's just dying slowly. No, we stay. We make them come to us, on our ground, where we have the advantage. And we make them understand that taking this boy is going to cost more than they're willing to pay. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that running was smarter, safer. But she looked at the cabin, at the careful construction and the well-tended garden, at the life Silas had built for himself in this remote valley. He was right. Running would mean giving up everything he'd worked for, and it would mean teaching Eli that home was just another temporary thing, another illusion that could be shattered by men with authority and bad intentions. Then teach me, she said. If we're making a stand, teach me how to fight. For the first time since she'd met him, something that might have been approval crossed Silas's face. Get the Winchester. We'll start now. They spent the morning running drills. Silas taught her the sight lines around the property, showed her where to position herself for maximum coverage with minimum exposure. He made her practice loading and reloading until her fingers could work the mechanism in the dark, until the motions became muscle memory rather than conscious thought. He taught her to breathe through the adrenaline, to steady her aim when her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. You're flinching, he said after she missed the target, a knot in a tree trunk 60 yards out, for the third time. Anticipating the recoil. Don't think about what happens after you pull the trigger. Think about where you want the bullet to go. Mara adjusted her stance, focused on the knot, let her breath out slowly and squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder and bark exploded from the tree 6 inches left of her target. Better. Again. By midday, she was hitting the knot 2 times out of 3. Her shoulder ached from the recoil and her ears rang from the gunfire, but she felt something settling into place inside her. Not confidence exactly, but a grim determination. If men came for Eli, they'd have to go through her first. Eli watched from the porch, his dark eyes tracking every movement. He hadn't spoken much since his arrival, just clung to Mara whenever she was close and watched the world with the wariness of something that had been hurt and hadn't forgotten the lesson. But he seemed calmer today, as if the routine of target practice provided some framework of normalcy in a world that had probably made very little sense to him for a long time. You're good with him, Silas observed as they walked back toward the cabin. Natural. How long did you have him before? 3 months, Mara said. From the time I found him until they took him away. Long enough to know I'd die before I let anyone hurt him. Not long enough to make it legal in anyone's eyes but mine. Legal doesn't mean right. You know that better than most. They ate lunch in companionable silence. Bread and cold venison, sharp cheese, water from the well. Eli sat between them, eating with the focused intensity of a child who'd known real hunger, who understood that food wasn't guaranteed and should never be wasted. Mara's heart ached watching him, thinking about what he must have endured in the 13 months since they'd been separated. Where did they send you? She asked gently. After the men took you from me. Do you remember? Eli's small face scrunched in concentration. Big house, lots of rooms, lady with yellow hair. She was mean when the man wasn't there. Rage flared hot and sudden in Mara's chest. Did she hurt you? Sometimes. Eli's voice was matter-of-fact, as if pain was just another weather condition to be endured. When I cried or made noise, she said I was ungrateful, said I should be happy they took me in. Silas's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of anger. This house? Was it in Red Hollow? Eli shook his head. Different place, bigger. Had a big white building with a bell. Church, Mara murmured. He's describing a church. That could be any of a dozen towns between here and the eastern settlements. The woman who sent him here, did you see her? Silas asked Eli. The one who gave you to the old man in black? Eli nodded slowly. She was sick, coughing blood. She said, he paused, struggling with memory. She said she was sorry, that she tried to be good, but it was too hard. She gave me to the man and said to take me to the mountain. Just like that? No explanation why? She said someone owed a debt. Eli looked up at Silas with those dark, too old eyes. She said you'd understand about debts. Silas stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid. Mara watched him, saw the tension in every line of his body, and knew he was wrestling with something from his past, some old wound that had never properly healed. "You know who she was," Mara said quietly. "Maybe." He didn't turn around. "There was a woman, years ago, before I came here. She helped me when I had nothing, when I was running from something I couldn't outrun. I tried to pay her back, tried to set things right, but she wouldn't take my money. Said someday I'd have a chance to help someone else the way she'd helped me. And that would be payment enough." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Guess she decided to collect." "And the yellow-haired woman? The one who hurt Eli? If she's who I think she is..." Silas's hands curled into fists. "She's the mayor's wife in a town called Millbrook, about 40 miles south of here. Her husband's part of the territorial council. Influential man. Connected." Mara's stomach dropped. "Then they'll have resources. Legal authority. They'll have everything except the moral high ground," Silas said flatly. "Which won't matter a damn bit when they come with badges and writs and the weight of territorial law behind them." The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Silas continued fortifying the property while Mara took inventory of their supplies: food, ammunition, medical supplies, lamp oil. Everything they might need if they had to withstand a siege. It felt surreal, like preparing for a war she'd never wanted to fight, but the alternative was unthinkable. Eli helped where he could, carrying small items, organizing the root cellar, his small hands working with determined focus. He didn't complain, didn't ask questions. He just worked, as if he understood on some fundamental level that survival required contribution, that safety was earned through vigilance and effort. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Mara was in the garden harvesting the last of the tomatoes when she heard it, the distant sound of horses, multiple riders moving fast. Her heart lurched. She dropped the basket and ran for the cabin, where Silas was already emerging with the Winchester in his hands. "Get Eli," he ordered. "Root cellar, now." "I'm not hiding while you..." "You're not hiding, you're protecting him." Silas thrust a pistol into her hands. "If something happens to me, you know what to do. Now move." Mara grabbed Eli and ran for the root cellar, her pulse hammering in her ears. She pushed aside the crates that concealed the entrance, lifted the heavy wooden door, and descended into the cool darkness below. Behind her, she heard the riders arriving, heard voices raised in commands and challenges. "Stay quiet," she whispered to Eli, pressing him against the far wall. "No matter what you hear, stay quiet." Above them, boots thudded across the porch. A fist pounded on the door. "Silas Boone, this is Marshal Vincent Carver, Territorial Authority. Open up or we're coming in." Mara heard the cabin door open, heard Silas's voice, calm and cold. "Marshal, what brings you to my property?" "Looking for a missing child. Boy about 4 years old, dark hair. Information suggests he may have been brought here." "Information from who?" "That's not your concern. We have legal authority to search this property for the child. You can cooperate, or we can do this the hard way." "You have a warrant?" A pause. "We have territorial emergency authorization. A child's welfare is at stake." "Show me the paperwork." Another pause, longer this time. Then a different voice, younger, aggressive. "We don't need to show you anything, mountain man. Step aside or we'll move you aside." "You're welcome to try, deputy." Silas's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Mara's skin prickle. "But I'm standing on my property, violating no laws, harboring no criminals. You want to search my home without proper documentation, you better be ready to explain to a territorial judge why you thought that was legal." "The child was kidnapped from his legal guardians," Marshal Carver said, his tone hardening. "That makes this an active criminal investigation. Stand down, Boone." "Or what? You'll shoot me on my own porch for asking to see a warrant?" Silas laughed, sharp and humorless. "Go ahead, Marshal. I'm sure the territorial governor will love explaining how his lawmen killed a citizen without legal cause. Real good for relations with the frontier settlements." In the root cellar, Mara held Eli tight, her hand over his mouth to muffle any sound. She could hear the tension above them, could feel it vibrating through the floorboards like a living thing. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this would explode into violence. "We know the boy is here," the younger deputy insisted. Old Josiah Kerr said he delivered a child to this location 3 days ago. You going to tell us that's a lie? I'm going to tell you that what Josiah delivered and what you're authorized to search for might be two different things, Silas said. Now, I'll ask one more time. Show me legal documentation that gives you the right to enter my home or get off my property. You're obstructing justice. I'm exercising my rights as a citizen. That bother you, Marshal? The silence stretched out, dangerous and electric. Mara's hand tightened on the pistol Silas had given her. If shooting started, if they tried to force their way in, she'd have seconds to make a decision, stay hidden or come up fighting. Then Marshal Carver spoke, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd made a calculation and didn't like the answer he'd reached. Stand down, deputy. We're not starting a firefight over this. But Marshal, I said stand down. Footsteps moved across the porch, away from the door. Mr. Boone, you're right. We should have brought proper documentation. That's our mistake. But understand this, we will be back, and when we return, we'll have every legal authorization necessary. If that child is here, if you're harboring him against the legal claim of his guardians, you'll face charges, kidnapping, obstruction, maybe accessory to child theft if we find evidence of conspiracy. I'll wait for your warrant, Silas said evenly. You do that. More footsteps, then the sound of horses being mounted. 3 days, Boone. 3 days to get your affairs in order, because when I come back, I'm taking that boy whether you like it or not. The horses departed, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Mara waited, counting her heartbeats, before she heard Silas's voice from above. They're gone. You can come up. She climbed the ladder with Eli on her hip, emerging into the cabin to find Silas standing by the window, watching the ridge where the riders had disappeared. 3 days? Mara said. That's all we have? Less than that. Silas turned to face her, and his expression was grim. Carver's not stupid. He knows he made a mistake coming here without proper documentation, and he's trying to save face by giving himself time to get his legal ducks in a row. But he also knows we might run, so he'll have men watching the trails, ready to intercept if we try to leave. So we're trapped. We're contained, Silas corrected. Different thing. They want us to feel trapped, want us to panic and make a mistake. But we're not going to do that. He moved to the table, began laying out maps and papers. We're going to do something they won't expect. Which is? We're going to prove that their legal claim is fraudulent. He tapped the map, indicating a town to the south. Millbrook. That's where Eli was supposedly placed with legal guardians. If the mayor's wife is who I think she is, and if Eli's description is accurate, then we need to find out exactly how legal that guardianship actually was. Mara stared at him. You want to go there? To the town where they'll be expecting us? Not us. Me. Silas pulled out a leather document case from beneath his bed, began sorting through papers. You and Eli stay here. I'll be back before Carver returns with his warrant. That's insane. If they catch you, they won't. I know paths that avoid the main trails, routes the marshal's men won't be watching. He found what he was looking for, a letter with an official seal. And I have contacts in Millbrook, people who owe me favors. If there's proof that Eli's guardianship was obtained illegally, I can find it. And if there's not, Silas met her eyes. Then we move to plan B, which is, we disappear, all three of us. There are places in the deep mountains where no one goes, where we could build a new life away from territorial law and men with badges. He folded the letter carefully. But that's last resort. I'd rather fight this legally if we can. Mara looked at Eli, who'd curled up in the rocking chair and was watching them with those dark, wary eyes. She thought about spending the rest of his childhood on the run, teaching him to fear strangers and distrust authority, raising him in the wilderness like a fugitive. How long will you be gone? She asked. 2 days? Maybe less if I push hard. Silas began gathering supplies. Dried meat, hardtack, a canteen, ammunition. You'll be safe here. The property's defensible, and you know how to use the weapons. If anyone approaches who isn't me, you get Eli to the tunnel and you run. No heroics, no last stands. Just survive. I'm not afraid for myself. I know. He paused, looked at her with something close to respect. You're tougher than you look, Mara Quinn, tougher than most men I've known. But tough doesn't mean invincible. Promise me you'll run if you have to." "I promise." The words felt like a lie even as she spoke them, but Silas seemed satisfied. He left before dawn the next morning, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness on the Rhone gelding, leaving Mara alone with Eli and the terrible waiting silence of the valley. The first day passed slowly. Mara kept herself busy with work, tending the animals, maintaining the garden, teaching Eli how to gather eggs from the henhouse without startling the chickens. Normal tasks, normal routines, as if by performing them she could convince the universe that everything was fine, that they were just two people living ordinary lives in an ordinary place. But she kept the Winchester close, and she checked the tree line every few minutes, and when night fell, she barricaded the door and slept in the rocking chair with Eli in her arms and the pistol in her lap. The second day was worse. Every sound made her jump: the creak of the barn door in the wind, the crack of a branch in the forest, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. She found herself thinking about Silas, wondering if he'd made it to Millbrook safely, if he'd found what he was looking for, if he was already on his way back or lying dead in some nameless gulch with a bullet in his back. By evening, her nerves were stretched so thin she could barely stand it. She made dinner mechanically, forcing herself and Eli to eat, even though the food tasted like sawdust and sat heavy in her stomach. She was washing the dishes when Eli spoke. "Is he coming back?" the boy asked quietly. Mara turned to find him watching her with those two old eyes. "Silas?" "Yes, sweetheart. Yes, he'll be back soon." "You don't know that." The blunt accuracy of the statement caught her off guard. Eli was 4 years old, but he'd lived through things that would break most adults. He knew that promises weren't guarantees, that people left and didn't come back, that safety was an illusion that could shatter at any moment. "You're right," Mara said, abandoning the dishes to kneel beside him. "I don't know for certain, but Silas is smart and strong and careful. If anyone can do this and come back safe, it's him. What if the bad men come first? Then we go to the tunnel, just like we practiced. We run, and we hide, and we survive. That's what we do, Eli. We survive." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." That night, Mara couldn't sleep at all. She sat by the window with the rifle across her knees, watching the moonlight paint silver shadows across the valley. Every hour felt like 10, every sound like a threat. When the first gray light of dawn finally began to seep into the sky, she felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, ready to jump out of her skin at the slightest provocation. She was making coffee when she heard it, hoofbeats, approaching fast from the south. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Too early for Silas to be back, too early for the marshal's deadline. This was something else. "Eli, root cellar, now," she commanded, grabbing the Winchester. But before the boy could move, the rider crested the ridge, and Mara's breath caught in her throat. It was Silas, pushing the roan hard, his face grim and urgent. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, strode toward the cabin with swift, purposeful steps. "Pack what you can carry in 5 minutes," he said without preamble. "We're leaving, now." "What happened?" "I found proof. Documentary evidence that Eli's guardianship was fraudulent. Forged signatures, falsified records. The whole thing corrupt from top to bottom." He was already moving through the cabin, grabbing supplies, shoving them into saddlebags. The mayor's wife never had legal custody. She bought the boy from a territorial clerk who was pocketing placement fees. Relief flooded through Mara. "Then we can fight this. We can't prove anything because the documents are gone." Silas's voice was flat, deadly. "I had them. I had everything we needed. Then I was ambushed 20 miles south of here by men who knew exactly where I'd be and what I'd found. They took the papers, tried to take me too. I barely got away." Mara's relief curdled into dread. "How did they know?" "Someone talked. Someone in Millbrook who I thought I could trust." He looked at her, and his pale eyes were hard as stone. "They're coming, Mara. Not in 3 days, not with warrants and legal process. They're coming now, with guns and the intention of making sure this problem disappears quietly. We have maybe 2 hours before they arrive, and when they do, they won't be taking prisoners." Eli stood frozen in the middle of the room, his small face pale. Mara felt her world tilting, felt all her fragile hopes crashing down around her. They'd been so close. So close to having something solid, something legal, something that could stand up in court. Now they had nothing except the clothes on their backs and the weapons in their hands. "The tunnel," she said. "We can—" "Won't work. If they know I found the documents, they know I'd have told you. They'll be watching all the routes out, including the tunnel exit." Silas strapped on a gun belt, checked the cylinder of his revolver. "We make our stand here. We hold them off until dark, then we use the chaos to break through their lines." "That's suicide." "Maybe." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "But it's the only chance we've got. You can still take Eli and run if you want. I'll buy you time. Hold them here as long as I can." Mara thought about running, about abandoning Silas to face the consequences of helping her alone. Thought about what that would make her, what lessons it would teach Eli about loyalty and courage and standing by the people who stood by you. She picked up the Winchester, checked the load, and took her position by the window. "We fight together," she said. "All three of us. That's how this works." Silas smiled, a rare expression that transformed his severe face into something almost gentle. "Then let's give them hell." They spent the next hour preparing. Silas positioned rifles at strategic windows, stacked ammunition within easy reach, filled buckets with water in case of fire. Mara moved through the cabin, memorizing sight lines and firing positions, while Eli, brave, terrified Eli, helped without complaint, his small hands carrying cartridges and supplies with grim determination. When the riders finally appeared on the ridge, there were more than Mara had expected. At least a dozen men, maybe more, spreading out to surround the property. Not lawmen this time. These were hired guns, mercenaries who'd do whatever they were paid to do and sleep soundly afterward. Marshal Carver rode at their head, his face set in hard lines. Beside him rode a woman in expensive riding clothes, her yellow hair pinned beneath a fashionable hat. The mayor's wife. "Come to reclaim her property." They stopped at the edge of rifle range, and Carver called out, "Last chance, Boone! Send out the boy, and maybe we let you and the woman walk away from this." Silas didn't answer. He just raised his rifle, sighted carefully, and fired. The shot kicked up dirt 6 inches in front of Carver's horse, making the animal rear and the marshal curse. "That's your answer?" Carver shouted. "Then you've chosen how this ends." He raised his hand, and the hired guns spurred their horses forward. The battle for the cabin had begun. The first volley of gunfire shattered the morning quiet, bullets thudding into the cabin walls and splintering wood from the window frames. Mara dropped below the sill, her heart hammering as glass exploded above her head and rained down in glittering fragments. "Don't waste ammunition," Silas shouted from across the room. "Pick your targets. Make every shot count." Mara rose just high enough to sight down the Winchester's barrel, found a rider circling toward the barn, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the man jerked sideways in his saddle, clutching his arm. Not a killing shot, but enough to send him retreating behind the tree line. "Good," Silas called. "Keep them off balance. Keep them guessing." Another wave of gunfire erupted, concentrated and deliberate now. The hired guns had spread out in a loose semicircle, using the barn and the woodshed for cover, laying down suppressing fire while others tried to advance. Mara could see the tactical precision in their movements. These weren't drunks from a saloon or hot-headed deputies looking for glory. These were professionals who knew how to break a defensive position. Silas fired 3 times in rapid succession, each shot deliberate and controlled. A man screamed, and Mara saw him fall from behind the water trough, clutching his leg. Another ducked back behind the barn, and a third abandoned his position entirely, sprinting for better cover. "They're testing our range," Silas said, reloading with practiced efficiency, "trying to figure out our blind spots. Mara, watch the east window. They'll try to flank us there." She moved to the indicated window just as 2 riders broke from the tree line, racing toward the side of the cabin. She fired, worked the lever, fired again. The first rider's horse reared and bolted, throwing its rider hard into the dirt. The second veered off, abandoning the approach. Behind her, she could hear Eli breathing in quick, frightened gasps. He'd taken shelter under the heavy wooden table, just as Silas had instructed, curled into a tight ball with his hands over his ears. Mara's heart broke seeing him there, seeing the terror in his small frame. But there was no time for comfort, No space for reassurance. Survival came first. Everything else was luxury. Boone! Marshal Carver's voice cut through the gunfire. You can't win this. Send out the boy, and we'll end this peacefully. There's nothing peaceful about what you're doing, Carver, Silas shouted back. You came here with hired killers to steal a child. That makes you a criminal, not a lawman. I have legal authority. You have forged documents and blood money. Silas fired again, and somewhere in the distance, a man cursed. I know what the mayor's wife paid for that boy, and I know you're helping her cover it up. That makes you complicit. A different voice now, high and sharp with fury. The yellow-haired woman. That child is mine by legal right. I paid good money for proper guardianship. You paid a corrupt clerk to forge placement papers. Mara couldn't stop herself from shouting. You bought a child like he was livestock. I gave him a home, food, clothes, education. What could you give him? A life of poverty and degradation? The woman's voice dripped with contempt. You're nothing but frontier trash, girl. You have no legal standing, no moral authority, and no right to that boy. I have the right that comes from loving him. Mara fired toward the sound of the woman's voice, not trying to hit her but to shut her up, to silence the poison dripping from her mouth. I have the right that comes from keeping him alive when everyone else left him for dead. Love, the woman laughed, cruel and cutting. Love doesn't feed a child. Love doesn't provide security. Love is a fantasy poor people tell themselves to justify their failures. Another surge of gunfire cut off Mara's reply. The hired guns were advancing again, using the distraction of the argument to push closer. Silas dropped 2 of them with precision shots, but more kept coming, and Mara realized with cold dread that they were being overwhelmed not by skill, but by simple numbers. How many bullets do we have left? She called to Silas. Enough for another hour if we're careful. He fired, worked the bolt, fired again. But they'll try to burn us out before then. Watch for anyone with torches. As if summoned by his words, Mara saw movement near the barn. A man with a bottle stuffed with cloth, the neck already lit and burning. He drew back his arm to throw, and Mara shot him through the shoulder. The bottle fell from his nerveless fingers, shattered on the ground, and flames erupted across the dry grass. Fire! Someone shouted from the attacker's ranks. Men scrambled to stamp out the flames before they could spread to the barn, and in the chaos, Silas took advantage of the distraction to drop 2 more of them, but the reprieve was temporary. Marshal Carver was shouting orders, reorganizing his men, preparing for another push. Mara could see the calculation in their movements now. They were going to rush the cabin simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the defenders through sheer force of numbers. Silas, she said quietly, they're going to charge. I know. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. When they do, you take Eli and go to the root cellar. Wait until you hear my signal, then use the tunnel. What signal? You'll know it when you hear it. He looked at her, and his pale eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or respect, or the particular sadness of a man who knows he's about to die but has made peace with it. You're a hell of a fighter, Mara Quinn. That boy's lucky to have you. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are, because this isn't about pride or courage anymore. It's about making sure that child survives. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, pressed it into her hand. This is a deed to the property signed over to you, legal and witnessed. If I don't make it, this place is yours. Build something good here. Make it mean something. Mara stared at the paper, at the careful script and the official seals, and felt tears burning in her eyes. You bastard! You planned this from the beginning. I planned for contingencies. He smiled, quick and sad. Now get ready. They're coming. Marshal Carver raised his hand, held it aloft for one long moment, then brought it down in a sharp chopping motion. The hired guns surged forward from all directions, screaming and firing, a wave of violence and fury crashing toward the cabin like a storm surge. Silas fired into the mass, working the rifle's action with mechanical precision. Men fell, but more kept coming. The cabin door shuddered under the impact of shoulders and boots, the wood splintering, the hinges groaning. Now, Mara, go! She grabbed Eli, pulled him from under the table, and ran for the root cellar. Behind her, she heard the cabin door give way, heard boots thundering across the floor, heard Silas's gun roaring defiance. She got Eli through the cellar entrance, scrambled down after him, and pulled the door shut just as the first of the hired guns burst into the room above. In the darkness, Eli clung to her, trembling. Mara held him with one arm and gripped the pistol with the other, listening to the chaos above. Shouts, gunfire, the crash of furniture being overturned. Where was Silas? Was he still fighting, or had they already... An explosion rocked the cabin, so loud and violent that Mara felt it in her bones. The floor above them groaned and cracked, and dust rained down through the gaps in the planking. Then another explosion, and another, and Mara realized what Silas had done. He'd rigged the cabin with charges. Black powder or dynamite, carefully placed to bring the whole structure down if things went wrong. His signal. His final gift to buy them time. "Move!" she shouted to Eli, dragging him toward the false wall at the back of the cellar. She found the third stone, pushed hard, and felt the mechanism give. The wall swung inward, revealing the dark mouth of the tunnel. Above them, the cabin was collapsing, timbers crashing down, men screaming as the floor gave way. Mara didn't look back. She pushed Eli into the tunnel and crawled after him, pulling the false wall shut behind them just as something massive and heavy crashed down where they'd been standing seconds before. The tunnel was narrow and pitch black, barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. Mara felt ahead with her hands, guiding Eli forward, trying to move quickly without panicking, without thinking about the tons of earth above them, or the possibility of cave-in, or the men who might be waiting at the other end. "Keep going, baby," she whispered. "Don't stop. Don't look back. Just keep crawling." Eli whimpered but obeyed, his small body wriggling forward through the darkness. Mara followed, her knees scraping on stone, her shoulders brushing the tunnel walls. How long was this passage? 50 yards, Silas had said, but in the suffocating blackness it felt like miles. Finally, mercifully, she saw light ahead. A thin gray glow that meant an opening, meant escape, meant survival. She urged Eli faster, and they emerged into the forest 50 yards from the burning ruins of the cabin, hidden by thick undergrowth and the natural slope of the land. Mara pulled Eli behind a fallen log and risked a look back. The cabin was an inferno, flames reaching 20 feet into the morning sky, smoke boiling up in thick black columns. She could see men scattered around the clearing, some lying motionless, others staggering away from the flames, coughing and disoriented. The barn was untouched, and the animals were screaming in panic, but the house itself was beyond saving. And Silas, there was no sign of Silas. No body visible, no movement, nothing but the roaring flames and the destruction he'd wrought to save them. Mara felt grief rising in her throat, hot and choking, but she forced it down. No time for mourning, not yet. She had to get Eli to safety, had to honor Silas's sacrifice by doing exactly what he'd died to accomplish. She was about to retreat deeper into the forest when she heard voices approaching from the tree line to her left. 2 of the hired guns, singed and limping but still armed, were searching the perimeter. "Kid has to be here somewhere," one was saying. "Boss lady wants him found or we don't get paid. Whole place is coming down. They probably got crushed in the cellar." "Then we find the bodies and prove it. Come on." Mara pressed herself and Eli flat against the ground behind the log, holding her breath, willing them to pass by. The footsteps came closer, crackling through dry leaves and fallen branches. 10 feet away. 5. One of the men stopped directly on the other side of the log. "You hear something?" Mara's hand tightened on the pistol. If they came around the log, if they saw Eli, she'd have no choice but to shoot, and shooting would bring every remaining gun in the area down on them. "Just the fire," the other man said. "Place sounds like the gates of hell opening up. Let's check the barn, then swing back around." The footsteps moved away. Mara waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then carefully lifted her head. The 2 men were heading toward the barn, their backs to her position. She had maybe 2 minutes before they completed their circuit and came back this way. "We have to run," she whispered to Eli. "Fast and quiet. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, his face pale but determined. "Stay low, follow me exactly, and whatever happens, don't make a sound." She rose to a crouch and began moving through the forest, using every scrap of cover, every shadow, every trick her father had taught her about moving unseen through hostile territory. Eli followed like her shadow, small and quick and silent as a ghost. They'd covered maybe 100 yards when she heard shouts behind them. Someone had found the tunnel exit, had realized they'd escaped. Within seconds, the whole search would be reorganized, and the forest would be crawling with armed men hunting for a woman and a child. Mara ran. She abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs, pulling Eli along when he stumbled. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, closer. Gunfire cracked through the trees, bullets whining off rocks and thudding into tree trunks. She had no plan, no destination, except away. Away from the burning cabin, away from the hired guns, away from Marshall Carver and the yellow-haired woman and the whole corrupt system that measured children's worth in forged documents and blood money. The forest thickened around them, the underbrush becoming almost impassable. Mara forced her way through, ignoring the thorns that tore at her clothes and the branches that whipped her face. Eli cried out as he stumbled, and she hauled him up bodily, carrying him now because speed mattered more than stealth. They broke through into a small clearing, and Mara's heart sank. Dead end. A sheer rock face rose 30 feet above them, too steep to climb quickly, with no obvious path around it. She spun, looking for another route, but the forest behind them was already alive with the sounds of pursuit. Trapped. After everything, after all of Silas's sacrifice, they were trapped like animals in a killing box. Mara set Eli down and raised the pistol, prepared to make her last stand right here, to take as many of them with her as she could before the end. At least Eli wouldn't be taken alive. At least he'd die free, not dragged back to that yellow-haired monster in a life of cruelty dressed up as civilization. The first of the hired guns burst into the clearing, saw them, raised his rifle, and jerked backward as a gunshot rang out from somewhere above. The man fell, and chaos erupted. More shots from the rock face, precise and deadly, dropping 2 more of the pursuers before they could even identify where the fire was coming from. Mara looked up and saw a figure silhouetted against the sky at the top of the cliff. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with lethal efficiency as he worked a rifle's action and fired again. Silas. Alive, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his clothes scorched and torn, but alive and fighting with the cold fury of a man who'd walked through hell and come out the other side still swinging. "Up here," he shouted down to her. "There's a path on the north side. Move!" Mara found the narrow trail he'd indicated, little more than a deer track winding up the rock face. She pushed Eli ahead of her and climbed, using roots and rocks for handholds, her muscles screaming with the effort. Behind and below, Silas's rifle continued its deadly work, keeping the hired guns pinned down, buying seconds and minutes with blood and violence. They reached the top, and Mara pulled Eli over the edge just as Silas fired his last round. He threw the empty rifle aside and grabbed them both, dragging them back from the cliff edge as bullets began chewing up the rock where they'd been standing. "How did you—" Mara started, but Silas cut her off. "No time. Move. Now." He led them at a run across the top of the ridge, following a path that was invisible to Mara, but clearly familiar to him. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers, climbing higher into the mountains where the air grew thin and cold. Finally, mercifully, Silas stopped in a small hollow sheltered by overhanging rocks. "We rest here," he gasped, and Mara saw how badly hurt he was. Blood soaked his left side and his right arm hung at an odd angle. Burns covered his hands and face, and every breath seemed to cost him tremendous effort. "You're hurt," Mara said, moving to help him, but he waved her off. "I'll live. For now." He slumped against the rocks, his pale eyes tracking the trail behind them. "They'll keep coming. Carver won't give up, not with the mayor's wife pushing him. We've embarrassed them, cost them men and money. They'll want blood for that." "Then we keep running." "No." Silas shook his head. "Running just delays the inevitable. We need to end this permanently, and to do that we need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" He pulled something from inside his scorched coat, a leather document case, miraculously intact despite everything he'd been through. The real documents, the ones proving the mayor's wife's guardianship was fraudulent. "I gave you a copy in the cabin, but these are the originals, signed, sealed, authenticated by a territorial clerk who's willing to testify." Mara stared at him. But you said they were taken, that you were ambushed. I was ambushed. They took the decoys I'd prepared in case something went wrong. He smiled, grim and satisfied despite his injuries. I'm not stupid, Mara. I knew there was a chance someone would try to stop me. So I made 2 sets of documents, convincing fakes for them to steal, and the real evidence that I kept hidden. Why didn't you tell me? Because if they'd captured you, I needed you to genuinely believe the documents were gone. Needed your desperation to be real, so they'd believe it too. He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. I'm sorry. I know that sounds cold, but it was the only way to protect both you and the evidence. Mara wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for the manipulation, but she couldn't, because he'd been right. If she'd known the real documents existed, she would have acted differently, and the hired guns would have read it in her face, in her body language, in the way she fought. They would have known something was off, and they would have pressed harder, dug deeper. So what now? She asked. We have the evidence, but we're still being hunted. How does this help us? We take it to someone who can actually do something with it, someone beyond the reach of corrupt territorial officials and hired guns. Silas looked at Eli, who'd fallen into an exhausted sleep curled against Mara's side. We take it to the territorial governor himself. Present the evidence in person, in front of witnesses, in a way that can't be buried or ignored. The governor's office is in Silver Falls. That's 3 days' hard ride from here, and we don't have horses, supplies, or a clear path. I know someone who can help, a woman who runs a trading post about 10 miles north of here. She owes me a favor, and she's got no love for territorial corruption. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. But we need to move now, before Carver reorganizes his men and cuts off our route north. Mara looked at him, at the blood, the burns, the way he could barely stand, and shook her head. You're in no condition to travel 10 miles. You need medical attention. What I need is to see this through. His voice was hard, final. I didn't blow up my home and nearly died just to give up now because I'm hurting. We finished this, Mara. Together, all the way to the end. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist he rest, but she knew that expression. Knew that once Silas Boone set his mind to something, arguing was as productive as arguing with a mountain. Then let me at least bind those wounds before you bleed to death, she said. He nodded, and she used strips torn from her shirt to wrap the worst of his injuries. The work was crude, far from the careful medical attention he actually needed, but it would have to do. When she finished, Silas tested his arm gingerly, winced, then nodded. Good enough. Let's move. They set off into the mountains, following trails that were invisible to Mara, but clearly marked in Silas's mental map of the wilderness. Eli walked between them, holding Mara's hand on one side and occasionally reaching for Silas's coat on the other, as if by touching them both he could keep the world from tearing them apart again. The sun climbed higher, turning the day hot and airless despite the elevation. Mara's throat burned with thirst, and her muscles ached from the running and the fighting and the constant adrenaline. But she kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant Eli went back to that yellow-haired monster. By mid-afternoon, they heard pursuit again. Distant at first, then growing closer. The sound of many horses, moving fast and organized. Carver had regrouped, had brought in fresh men and fresh mounts, and was closing the gap with professional efficiency. They're tracking us, Silas said, his breathing labored. Following our trail. We need to break it, lose them long enough to reach Anna's trading post. How? He led them to a stream cutting through the rocks, its water running fast and cold over smooth stones. We wade upstream. Water won't hold scent or tracks. It'll slow us down, but it'll confuse the trail. They entered the stream, and the cold water was a shock after the heat of the day. Eli gasped and clutched Mara's hand tighter, but he didn't complain, just waded forward with the grim determination of a child who'd learned that survival required silence and endurance. They followed the stream for over an hour, the water never deeper than knee-high, but the current strong enough that walking required constant attention. Mara's feet went numb, and she lost count of how many times she nearly slipped on the smooth rocks. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded, grew confused, circled back on themselves. Finally, Silas led them out of the water and onto a rocky slope where their tracks would be harder to follow. They climbed in silence, Mara supporting Silas when his strength faltered, until they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising in the distance. "Anna's place," Silas said, relief evident in his voice. "We're almost there." But as they descended toward the trading post, Mara saw riders approaching from the east, 4 men on horseback, moving with purpose directly toward the same destination. "Silas," she said quietly, "we've got company." He followed her gaze, squinted at the distant riders, then swore softly. "They sent a second group to cut us off. Must have guessed where we'd go." He looked at Mara, at Eli, at the trading post still half a mile away. "We run for it. Full sprint. If we can reach Anna before they do, we've got a chance. And if we can't, then we make them earn it." He pulled the pistol from his belt, checked the cylinder, handed it to Mara. "Whatever happens, you get Eli inside that trading post. Anna will protect him. She's tough as iron, and she's got enough firepower to hold off a small army." They ran. Mara carried Eli now, her arms burning with his weight, her lungs screaming for air. Silas ran beside her, one hand pressed to his wounded side, his face gray with pain and blood loss, but his legs still moving, still driving him forward through sheer force of will. The riders saw them, spurred their horses to a gallop. It became a race, desperate and brutal, 400 yards of open ground between the ridge and the trading post, and whoever reached it first would control the outcome. 300 yards. The riders were gaining, their horses eating up the distance. 200 yards. Mara could see the trading post clearly now, a sturdy log building with a covered porch and shuttered windows, smoke rising from its chimney. Could see a woman emerge onto the porch, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats, a rifle already in her hands. 100 yards. The riders were close enough that Mara could hear them shouting, could hear the thunder of hooves on hard ground. 50 yards. So close, so impossibly close. "Anna!" Silas roared. "Cover us!" The woman on the porch, Anna, gray-haired and hard-faced and completely unafraid, raised her rifle and fired. One of the riders pitched sideways out of his saddle. She worked the lever, fired again, and a second horse reared and bolted. Mara hit the porch steps and stumbled, nearly dropping Eli. Strong hands caught her, Anna's hands, rough and capable, and pulled her inside. "Inside quickly," Anna commanded, then turned her rifle on the remaining riders. "And you boys can turn around right now, or I'll drop you where you sit." The riders pulled up short, their horses dancing nervously. Behind Mara, Silas collapsed against the doorframe, barely conscious, his shirt soaked with blood. "Anna," he gasped. "Need your help. Need to get to Silver Falls. Have evidence. Territorial corruption. Governor needs to see." Anna looked at him, at Mara, at the terrified child in Mara's arms, and her weathered face hardened into something fierce and protective. "Inside, all of you," she said. "And you riders, you tell Marshal Carver that if he wants to start a war with me, he's welcome to try. But he better bring more men than this." She slammed the door, dropped a heavy bar across it, and turned to face her unexpected guests with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and determination. "Silas Boone," she said, "you always did know how to bring interesting trouble to my doorstep." "Interesting is one word for it," Silas muttered. Then his legs gave out completely, and he collapsed onto Anna's floor in a spreading pool of blood. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the worst of his wounds, but blood seeped between her fingers with terrifying speed. "He needs a doctor. Now!" Anna was already moving, her years of frontier living evident in the efficiency of her actions. She grabbed clean cloth from a cabinet, a bottle of whiskey from a shelf, and a leather case that proved to contain surgical tools. "Nearest doctor's 2 days' ride, and your friend doesn't have 2 hours. I'll have to do it myself. Get him to the table." Together they hauled Silas onto the heavy wooden table that dominated Anna's main room. He was barely conscious now, his pale eyes unfocused, his breathing shallow and rapid. Anna cut away his ruined shirt, revealing the full extent of his injuries. Burns, deep lacerations, and worst of all, a bullet wound in his left side that was still bleeding despite Mara's crude field dressing. "Hold him down," Anna commanded, pouring whiskey over her hands and the surgical tools. "This is going to hurt like hell, and I need him still." Mara positioned herself at Silas's shoulders while Anna went to work. Outside, she could hear shouting. the riders regrouping, Marshal Carver's voice raised in anger and threats. But inside, everything narrowed to the sound of Anna's breathing, the clink of metal instruments, and Silas's occasional groans of pain when Anna probed too deep. Eli had retreated to a corner, his small body pressed against the wall, watching everything with those dark, haunted eyes. Mara wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but she couldn't leave Silas. Couldn't abandon the man who'd given up everything to protect them. "Got it," Anna said finally, dropping a flattened bullet into a tin bowl with a wet clink. Missed the vital organs, but it tore through muscle like butter. He's lucky it didn't nick the liver. Will he live? Depends on infection, blood loss, and whether he's got the will to fight. Anna began stitching the wound closed with quick, practiced movements. But Silas Boone's too stubborn to die easily. I've known him 15 years, and I've never seen him quit anything. Outside, the shouting had stopped. An ominous silence had settled over the trading post, broken only by the occasional creak of saddle leather and the nervous stamping of horses. "They're planning something," Mara said quietly. "Let them plan." Anna tied off the last stitch and began bandaging Silas's torso. "These walls are 2 feet of solid log. Windows are shuttered and barred. I've got enough food and water to last a month, and enough ammunition to fight off an army. They want to wait us out. They're welcome to try. Carver won't wait. He can't afford to. Every hour that passes is another hour we might get word to someone who matters. Then he'll try to force entry, and I'll kill the first 3 men through my door." Anna's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "I've held this post against Comanche raids, outlaw gangs, and a territorial tax collector who thought he could intimidate me. A corrupt marshal and his hired thugs don't scare me." A voice called from outside. Not Carver this time, but the yellow-haired woman, her tone imperious and sharp. "Mrs. Garrett, I know you're in there. I am Eleanor Blackwood, wife of Mayor Cornelius Blackwood of Millbrook. I demand you surrender the child immediately." Anna's weathered face twisted into something between amusement and contempt. "That's Eleanor Blackwood? Heard stories about her. Rich girl from back east who married into frontier politics and thinks that makes her royalty." "She's the one who bought Eli," Mara said, her voice tight with anger. "Paid a corrupt clerk to forge guardianship papers so she could have a child without the inconvenience of actually bearing one." "Mrs. Garrett," Eleanor called again, "you are harboring a kidnapped child and a known criminal. Surrender them now, or face charges of obstruction and accessory to kidnapping." Anna moved to the shuttered window, opened a small gun port, and shouted back, "Eleanor Blackwood, this is my property, and you're trespassing. You've got no legal authority here, and neither does your pet marshal. Now get off my land before I start shooting." "I have every legal authority. That child was legally placed in my custody by territorial decree." "Then you won't mind proving it to the territorial governor." Anna's voice dripped with challenge. "Because that's where these folks are headed, straight to Silver Falls with evidence of your corruption. You want to stop them? You're going to have to go through me first." Silence. Then Eleanor's voice, colder now, stripped of its false civility. "You're making a mistake, Anna Garrett, a very expensive mistake." "I've made worse." Anna slammed the gun port shut and turned to Mara. "You mentioned evidence. What exactly are we talking about?" Mara pulled the leather document case from inside her shirt, miraculously intact despite everything, and handed it to Anna. The older woman examined the contents carefully, her expression growing darker with each page she read. Forged signatures, falsified placement records, bribery receipts. Anna looked up, her eyes hard. "This is enough to hang a dozen people, including a territorial clerk and probably a judge or 2. No wonder they want you dead." "Can you get us to Silver Falls?" Mara asked. "Silas said you could help." "I can do better than that." Anna moved to a desk in the corner and began writing rapidly on official-looking paper. "I'm a licensed territorial witness and a registered land agent. That means my testimony carries legal weight, and I can authenticate documents for official proceedings. I'll draft an affidavit right now, attesting to the validity of these documents and the circumstances of their delivery. Then we send a rider to Silver Falls, someone fast, someone Carver's men won't expect." "Who?" Anna smiled grimly. "My nephew, James. He's 17, knows these mountains like the back of his hand, and rides like the devil himself is chasing him. He can reach Silver Falls in a day and a half if he pushes hard. They'll try to stop him. They'll try. Anna finished writing and sealed the document with wax and an official stamp. But James knows routes they don't, hidden trails through the high passes that only locals use. He'll get through. She moved to a door at the back of the room and called out, "James, get in here, boy." A lanky youth with Anna's gray eyes and a shock of red hair emerged from what looked like a storage room. "Yes, Aunt Anna? Need you to ride to Silver Falls, fast as you can, no stopping for anything. You'll take these documents to the governor's office and put them directly in Governor Marshall's hands. Nobody else. Understand?" James's eyes went wide as he looked at the papers, then at Mara and the wounded Silas, then at Eli huddled in the corner. "There's armed men outside." "I'm aware. You'll go out through the tunnel." "You have a tunnel too?" Mara asked, remembering Silas's escape route. "Every smart person in hostile territory has a tunnel." Anna handed James the documents and a leather satchel of supplies. "You know the route. South through the old mine shaft, then pick up the western trail at Boulder Creek. Stay off the main roads, avoid towns, and if anyone asks questions, you're just a messenger boy running errands for your aunt." James nodded, all business despite his youth. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. I've got good people here, good walls, and enough firepower to make any assault very expensive." She gripped his shoulder. "Now go. Every minute counts." James disappeared back into the storage room. Moments later, Mara heard the scrape of stone on stone, a hidden passage opening. Then silence. Outside, voices were arguing. Mara caught fragments, Eleanor Blackwood demanding immediate action, Carver counseling patience, some of the hired guns getting nervous about the delay. They'd come expecting an easy hunt, a quick capture. Instead, they'd run into organized resistance, lost men, and were now facing a fortified position held by a woman with a fearsome reputation. "How long can we actually hold out?" Mara asked quietly. "Long as we need to." Anna checked on Silas, who'd slipped into an uneasy sleep, his face pale but his breathing more regular. "But it won't come to a long siege. Carver knows that if word reaches Silver Falls, he's finished. He'll make a move soon, tonight probably, when he thinks we're tired and our guard is down. Then we prepare." They spent the afternoon fortifying their position. Anna showed Mara the layout of the trading post, 2 main rooms, a storage area, and the hidden tunnel exit that James had used. Every window had firing ports, every door was reinforced, and Anna had stockpiled enough ammunition to outfit a small militia. "You've done this before," Mara observed as they positioned weapons at strategic locations, 3 times, twice against raiders, once against a crooked land speculator who thought he could burn me out and claim my property. Anna's smile was wolfish. He was wrong. They all were. As darkness fell, Mara fed Eli and tried to get him to sleep on a bedroll in the back room. But he clung to her, his small fingers twisted in her shirt, his eyes wide with fear every time she tried to pull away. "I'm scared," he whispered. "What if the bad people take me again?" Mara held him close, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. "They won't, I promise you, Eli. I will die before I let anyone take you from me again." "But you almost died today. Silas almost died." "Almost doesn't count." She stroked his dark curls, remembering all the times she'd done this before, in those 3 precious months when he'd been hers. "We're still here. We're still fighting, and we're going to win." "How do you know?" "Because we have something they don't." She tilted his chin up so he was looking at her. "We have love. Real love, not the fake kind that comes with money and papers. And love makes you stronger than you think you can be. Makes you brave when you're terrified. Makes you stand when everything tells you to run." "Is that why you came back for me? When you could have stayed safe?" Mara felt tears burning in her eyes. "Sweetheart, there is no safety for me in a world where you're being hurt. I would walk through fire to keep you safe. Would face down an army. Would give up everything I have and everything I am. That's what love is." Eli was quiet for a moment, then said in a small voice, "I love you too, Mama." The word hit Mara like a physical blow. Mama. He'd never called her that before. Not in those first 3 months, when he'd been too traumatized to speak much at all. Not in the brief moment of reunion before chaos descended. But now, here, In this besieged trading post with violence waiting outside the walls, he'd chosen this word, this declaration. "I love you too, baby," she whispered, and held him until he finally fell asleep. She returned to the main room to find Anna at the window, watching the perimeter through a narrow gap in the shutters. "They're moving," the older woman said quietly, "setting up for an assault. I count at least 8 men, probably more I can't see. Carver? Out there, giving orders. And the Blackwood woman, directing things like it's a social event instead of an attack." Anna spat into a brass spittoon with perfect accuracy. "Rich people. Think they can buy or bully their way through anything." Silas stirred on the table, his eyes fluttering open. "Anna? I'm here, you stubborn fool." She moved to his side. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot, burned, and dragged behind a horse." He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and settled back down. "What's happening?" "Your nephew James is riding to Silver Falls with the evidence. We're holding the fort until help arrives." Anna helped him drink some water. "You just focus on not dying." "Never been good at dying." Silas's eyes found Mara. "Eli?" "Safe. Sleeping. He called me Mama." Something that might have been a smile crossed Silas's pain-creased face. "Good. That's good." A crash outside interrupted them, something heavy hitting the trading post's outer wall. Then another crash, and another. They were using a battering ram trying to break through the reinforced front door. "Here we go," Anna said calmly, picking up her rifle. "Mara, you take the east window. I've got the front. We make every shot count." The battering continued, rhythmic and relentless. Boom, boom, boom. The door held, but Mara could hear the wood beginning to splinter. They had minutes at most before the assault began in earnest. The night stretched ahead of them, filled with violence and uncertainty. But Mara gripped her rifle and took her position, ready to defend the people she loved with every ounce of strength she possessed. Outside, Eleanor Blackwood's hired guns prepared their final assault. Inside, 3 people and a child made ready to stand against impossible odds. And somewhere in the darkness, a 17-year-old boy rode like lightning towards Silver Falls, carrying evidence that could topple an empire of corruption or die with him in some nameless canyon. Everything balanced on the edge of a knife, and the night had only just begun. "Interesting is one word for it," Silas muttered. Then his legs gave out completely, and he collapsed onto Anna's floor in a spreading pool of blood. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the worst of his wounds, but blood seeped between her fingers with terrifying speed. "He needs a doctor, now." Anna was already moving, her years of frontier living evident in the efficiency of her actions. She grabbed clean cloth from a cabinet, a bottle of whiskey from a shelf, and a leather case that proved to contain surgical tools. "Nearest doctor's 2 days' ride, and your friend doesn't have 2 hours. I'll have to do it myself. Get him to the table." Together, they hauled Silas onto the heavy wooden table that dominated Anna's main room. He was barely conscious now, his pale eyes unfocused, his breathing shallow and rapid. Anna cut away his ruined shirt, revealing the full extent of his injuries, burns, deep lacerations, and worst of all, a bullet wound in his left side that was still bleeding despite Mara's crude field dressing. "Hold him down," Anna commanded, pouring whiskey over her hands and the surgical tools. "This is going to hurt like hell, and I need him still." Mara positioned herself at Silas's shoulders while Anna went to work. Outside, she could hear shouting, the riders regrouping, Marshal Carver's voice raised in anger and threats. But inside, everything narrowed to the sound of Anna's breathing, the clink of metal instruments, and Silas's occasional groans of pain when Anna probed too deep. Eli had retreated to a corner, his small body pressed against the wall, watching everything with those dark, haunted eyes. Mara wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but she couldn't leave Silas, couldn't abandon the man who'd given up everything to protect them. "Got it," Anna said finally, dropping a flattened bullet into a tin bowl with a wet clink. Missed the vital organs, but it tore through muscle like butter. He's lucky it didn't nick the liver. Will he live? Depends on infection, blood loss, and whether he's got the will to fight. Anna began stitching the wound closed with quick, practiced movements. But Silas Boone's too stubborn to die easily. I've known him 15 years and I've never seen him quit anything. Outside, the shouting had stopped. An ominous silence had settled over the trading post, broken only by the occasional creak of saddle leather and the nervous stamping of horses. "They're planning something," Mara said quietly. "Let them plan." Anna tied off the last stitch and began bandaging Silas's torso. "These walls are 2 feet of solid log. Windows are shuttered and barred. I've got enough food and water to last a month and enough ammunition to fight off an army. They want to wait us out. They're welcome to try. Carver won't wait. He can't afford to. Every hour that passes is another hour we might get word to someone who matters. Then he'll try to force entry, and I'll kill the first 3 men through my door." Anna's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "I've held this post against Comanche raids, outlaw gangs, and a territorial tax collector who thought he could intimidate me. A corrupt marshal and his hired thugs don't scare me." A voice called from outside, not Carver this time, but the yellow-haired woman, her tone imperious and sharp. "Mrs. Garrett, I know you're in there. I am Eleanor Blackwood, wife of Mayor Cornelius Blackwood of Millbrook. I demand you surrender the child immediately." Anna's weathered face twisted into something between amusement and contempt. "That's Eleanor Blackwood? Heard stories about her. Rich girl from back east who married into frontier politics and thinks that makes her royalty." "She's the one who bought Eli," Mara said, her voice tight with anger. "Paid a corrupt clerk to forge guardianship papers so she could have a child without the inconvenience of actually bearing one." "Mrs. Garrett," Eleanor called again, "you are harboring a kidnapped child and a known criminal. Surrender them now or face charges of obstruction and accessory to kidnapping." Anna moved to the shuttered window, opened a small gun port, and shouted back. "Eleanor Blackwood, this is my property, and you're trespassing. You've got no legal authority here, and neither does your pet marshal. Now get off my land before I start shooting." "I have every legal authority. That child was legally placed in my custody by territorial decree." "Then you won't mind proving it to the territorial governor." Anna's voice dripped with challenge. "Because that's where these folks are headed, straight to Silver Falls with evidence of your corruption. You want to stop them, you're going to have to go through me first." Silence. Then Eleanor's voice, colder now, stripped of its false civility. "You're making a mistake, Anna Garrett. A very expensive mistake." "I've made worse." Anna slammed the gun port shut and turned to Mara. "You mentioned evidence. What exactly are we talking about?" Mara pulled the leather document case from inside her shirt, miraculously intact despite everything, and handed it to Anna. The older woman examined the contents carefully, her expression growing darker with each page she read. Forged signatures, falsified placement records, bribery receipts. Anna looked up, her eyes hard. "This is enough to hang a dozen people, including a territorial clerk and probably a judge or two. No wonder they want you dead." "Can you get us to Silver Falls?" Mara asked. "Silas said you could help." "I can do better than that." Anna moved to a desk in the corner and began writing rapidly on official-looking paper. "I'm a licensed territorial witness and a registered land agent. That means my testimony carries legal weight, and I can authenticate documents for official proceedings. I'll draft an affidavit right now, attesting to the validity of these documents and the circumstances of their delivery. Then we send a writer to Silver Falls, someone fast, someone Carver's men won't expect." "Who?" Anna smiled grimly. "My nephew, James. He's 17, knows these mountains like the back of his hand, and rides like the devil himself is chasing him. He can reach Silver Falls in a day and a half if he pushes hard." "They'll try to stop him." "They'll try." Anna finished writing and sealed the document with wax and an official stamp. "But James knows routes they don't, hidden trails through the high passes that only locals use. He'll get through." She moved to a door at the back of the room and called out, "James, get in here, boy." A lanky youth with Anna's gray eyes and a shock of red hair emerged from what looked like a storage room. "Yes, Aunt Anna?" "Need you to ride to Silver Falls, fast as you can, no stopping for anything. You'll take these documents to the governor's office and put them directly in Governor Marshall's hands. Nobody else. Understand?" James's eyes went wide as he looked at the papers, then at Mara and the wounded Silas, then at Eli huddled in the corner. "There's armed men outside." "I'm aware. You'll go out through the tunnel." "You have a tunnel too?" Mara asked, remembering Silas's escape route. Every smart person in hostile territory has a tunnel. Anna handed James the documents and a leather satchel of supplies. You know the route, south through the old mine shaft, then pick up the western trail at Boulder Creek. Stay off the main roads, avoid towns, and if anyone asks questions, you're just a messenger boy running errands for your aunt. James nodded, all business despite his youth. What about you? I'll be fine. I've got good people here, good walls, and enough firepower to make any assault very expensive. She gripped his shoulder. Now go. Every minute counts. James disappeared back into the storage room. Moments later, Mara heard the scrape of stone on stone, a hidden passage opening. Then silence. Outside, voices were arguing. Mara caught fragments, Eleanor Blackwood demanding immediate action, Carver counseling patience, some of the hired guns getting nervous about the delay. They'd come expecting an easy hunt, a quick capture. Instead, they'd run into organized resistance, lost men, and were now facing a fortified position held by a woman with a fearsome reputation. How long can we actually hold out? Mara asked quietly. Long as we need to. Anna checked on Silas, who'd slipped into an uneasy sleep, his face pale but his breathing more regular. But it won't come to a long siege. Carver knows that if word reaches Silver Falls, he's finished. He'll make a move soon, tonight probably, when he thinks we're tired and our guard is down. Then we prepare. They spent the afternoon fortifying their position. Anna showed Mara the layout of the trading post, 2 main rooms, a storage area, and the hidden tunnel exit that James had used. Every window had firing ports, every door was reinforced, and Anna had stockpiled enough ammunition to outfit a small militia. You've done this before, Mara observed as they positioned weapons at strategic locations. 3 times, twice against raiders, once against a crooked land speculator who thought he could burn me out and claim my property. Anna's smile was wolfish. He was wrong. They all were. As darkness fell, Mara fed Eli and tried to get him to sleep on a bedroll in the back room, but he clung to her, his small fingers twisted in her shirt, his eyes wide with fear every time she tried to pull away. I'm scared, he whispered. What if the bad people take me again? Mara held him close, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. They won't. I promise you, Eli. I will die before I let anyone take you from me again. But you almost died today. Silas almost died. Almost doesn't count. She stroked his dark curls, remembering all the times she'd done this before, in those 3 precious months when he'd been hers. We're still here. We're still fighting, and we're going to win. How do you know? Because we have something they don't. She tilted his chin up so he was looking at her. We have love. Real love, not the fake kind that comes with money and papers. And love makes you stronger than you think you can be. Makes you brave when you're terrified. Makes you stand when everything tells you to run. Is that why you came back for me? When you could have stayed safe? Mara felt tears burning in her eyes. Sweetheart, there is no safety for me in a world where you're being hurt. I would walk through fire to keep you safe. Would face down an army. Would give up everything I have and everything I am. That's what love is. Eli was quiet for a moment, then said in a small voice, I love you too, Mama. The word hit Mara like a physical blow. Mama. He'd never called her that before. Not in those first 3 months, when he'd been too traumatized to speak much at all. Not in the brief moment of reunion before chaos descended. But now, here, in this besieged trading post with violence waiting outside the walls, he'd chosen this word, this declaration. I love you too, baby, she whispered, and held him until he finally fell asleep. She returned to the main room to find Anna at the window, watching the perimeter through a narrow gap in the shutters. They're moving, the older woman said quietly, setting up for an assault. I count at least 8 men, probably more I can't see. Carver? Out there giving orders. And the Blackwood woman, directing things like it's a social event instead of an attack. Anna spat into a brass spittoon with perfect accuracy. Rich people. Think they can buy or bully their way through anything. Silas stirred on the table, his eyes fluttering open. Anna? I'm here, you stubborn fool. She moved to his side. How do you feel? Like I got shot, burned, and dragged behind a horse. He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and settled back down. What's happening? Your nephew's riding to Silver Falls with the evidence. We're holding the fort until help arrives. Anna helped him drink some water. You just focus on not dying. Never been good at dying. Silas's eyes found Mara. Eli? Safe. Sleeping. Good. His hand fumbled for hers, gripped it weakly. Whatever happens, you get him out. Promise me. We're all getting out, Mara said firmly. All of us. Together. A crash outside interrupted them. Something heavy hitting the trading post's outer wall. Then another crash, and another. They were using a battering ram, trying to break through the reinforced front door. Here we go, Anna said calmly, picking up her rifle. Mara, you take the east window. I've got the front. We make every shot count. The battering continued, rhythmic and relentless. Boom, boom, boom. The door held, but Mara could hear the wood beginning to splinter. They had minutes at most. When the door goes, Anna instructed, they'll rush in fast and hard. We hit them in the doorway, create a bottleneck. They can't use superior numbers if they can only come through single file. Mara took her position at the window, rifle ready, and waited. The battering ram hit again, and she heard the crack of the door's crossbar beginning to give. Then, cutting through the night air, came a sound that made everyone freeze. The clear, sharp notes of a bugle call. Not the call to attack, but something else. Something official. The battering stopped. Confused voices rose outside. Anna risked a look through the gun port, then laughed. A genuine, delighted sound. Well, I'll be damned. The boy must have ridden like lightning. What is it? Mara asked. Territorial Rangers, a full squad by the looks of it. And leading them, Anna's grin widened. That's Governor Marshall himself. Mara's heart leaped. James made it? Made it and convinced the governor to ride back with him personally. Anna threw open the door, and Mara saw her, a column of mounted men in Territorial Ranger uniforms, their badges gleaming in the torchlight. And at their head, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Marshal Carver and his hired guns had backed away from the trading post, their weapons lowered but not holstered, uncertainty written across their faces. Eleanor Blackwood sat rigid on her horse, her expression one of barely controlled fury. Governor Marshall dismounted and approached the trading post with slow, deliberate steps. His eyes took in everything, the damaged door, the defensive positions, the armed men who'd clearly been mounting an assault. Marshal Carver, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly. Would you care to explain why you're attacking a licensed territorial trading post with what appears to be a private militia? Governor Marshall, Carver straightened, trying for dignity and landing somewhere around desperate. We're pursuing a kidnapped child and the criminals who took him. We have legal authority. Do you? The governor pulled a paper from his coat. Because according to this affidavit, witnessed and authenticated by Anna Garrett, who I know personally to be honest and reliable, you're actually pursuing a woman and child who are fleeing from a fraudulent guardianship based on forged documents. That's a lie. Eleanor Blackwood's voice was shrill. I have legal custody of that child. The paperwork is completely legitimate. Then you won't mind if we examine that paperwork in detail. Governor Marshall gestured, and 2 rangers moved forward. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm placing you under temporary detention pending investigation of serious allegations of corruption, forgery, and child trafficking. You can't do this! My husband is on the Territorial Council. He'll have your position for this. Your husband, the governor said coldly, is currently under arrest in Millbrook on charges of bribery and corruption. The investigation began 3 weeks ago. We've been gathering evidence of widespread fraud in the child placement system, and your name came up repeatedly. He looked at Carver. As did yours, Marshal. Carver's face went gray. I was following orders, legal orders from territorial officials. Orders to assault a civilian residence? To hire private guns for what amounts to a kidnapping? The governor shook his head. You're finished, Carver. Turn over your badge. For a moment, Mara thought the marshal might resist. His hand drifted toward his gun, and the hired guns shifted nervously. But then he saw the rangers' hands resting on their own weapons, saw the cold determination in Governor Marshall's eyes, and whatever fight he had left drained away. He unpinned his badge and handed it over. The rest of you, the governor called to the hired guns. You've got one chance to ride away from this without facing charges. Take it now. They didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes, the clearing was empty except for Carver, Eleanor Blackwood, the Rangers, and the small group inside the trading post. Governor Marshall approached the door, and Anna stepped aside to let him enter. His eyes went immediately to Silas on the table, then to Mara, then to the door of the back room where Eli was sleeping. "I'm Governor Richard Marshall," he said to Mara, "and you must be Mara Quinn. James filled me in on the situation during our ride. I'd like to hear your side of the story, and I'd like to see the boy." Mara led him to the back room, where Eli was still sleeping despite the commotion. The governor looked at the child for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "He looks peaceful," he said quietly. "He hasn't been peaceful in a long time," Mara replied. "Not since men with legal authority took him from me the first time. I read the documents James brought. The evidence is damning." He turned to face her. "But I need to ask you directly. What is your relationship to this child? What gives you the right to claim him?" Mara felt anger flash hot and bright. "I don't have legal papers, if that's what you're asking. I didn't buy him from a corrupt clerk or forge guardianship documents. I just found him in the ruins of a massacre, kept him alive for 3 months, and loved him like he was my own blood. That's all I have, love, and 3 months of caring for him when no one else would. And yet you came back for him, risked everything to save him from a situation that was, on paper, completely legal. Legal doesn't mean right. You should know that better than anyone." The governor's lips twitched in what might have been approval. "You're correct. Legal and right aren't always the same thing." He looked at Eli again. "The boy's biological parents. Do we know anything about them?" "Dead in a wagon train massacre, according to what I could learn. His mother, for certain, I found him under her body. His father—" Mara paused. "I never knew who he was." "I might." The governor pulled out another document, this one older and more worn. "When James explained the situation, I had my clerk search our military records. We found something interesting. A scout named Elijah Cartwright who disappeared during a Comanche raid 18 months ago. His wife Sarah was traveling with a civilian wagon train at the time. She was pregnant." Mara's breath caught. The timeline would fit. More than that, Elijah Cartwright was a decorated territorial scout. He saved the lives of 3 governors during his service, including mine. He was a hero. Marshall looked at her with new intensity. "If this boy is his son, then he's the orphan child of a territorial hero. That changes everything about his legal status." "How?" "Territorial code provides special protections for the orphan children of decorated servicemen. It stipulates that such children be placed with family members or, failing that, with individuals who demonstrate a clear and proven commitment to the child's welfare." He smiled slightly. "Walking 43 days to a new territory, keeping a traumatized boy alive for 3 months, and then risking your life to save him from an abusive situation? I'd say that demonstrates commitment." Hope flared in Mara's chest, so bright and fierce it was almost painful. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if we can prove this boy is Elijah Cartwright's son, then Eleanor Blackwood's claim is not just fraudulent, but legally void. And I'm saying that your claim, while unconventional, has far more moral and legal weight than hers ever did. How do we prove it?" "The boy, what's his full name?" "He's only ever told me Eli. He was too young to remember more when I found him." The governor knelt beside the sleeping child and gently shook his shoulder. "Son, I need to ask you something." Eli's eyes opened, confused and frightened, until he saw Mara. Then he relaxed slightly. "It's all right, sweetheart," Mara said. "This man is here to help. Can you answer his question?" "What's your whole name?" the governor asked gently. "Not just Eli, but your full name." Eli's small face scrunched in concentration. "Eli. Elijah. Elijah Peter Cartwright. Mama used to say it when she was happy. Said I was named for Daddy." The governor sat back on his heels, something like satisfaction crossing his face. "There it is. Elijah Peter Cartwright, son of Elijah and Sarah Cartwright, orphaned in a Comanche raid, found and protected by Mara Quinn." He stood and extended his hand to Mara. "Miss Quinn, as territorial governor, I'm granting you immediate emergency guardianship of this child, pending formal adoption proceedings. Mara stared at his hand, unable to process what she was hearing. Just like that? Just like that. The law isn't always slow and complicated. Sometimes it's exactly what it should be. Protection for those who need it and justice for those who've been wronged. He pulled out official-looking forms and began filling them out on the spot. I'll sign these tonight. By morning, you'll have legal custody that no corrupt clerk or ambitious mayor's wife can challenge. Tears spilled down Mara's cheeks. She looked at Eli, at his dark eyes watching her with absolute trust, and felt something break open inside her. Not grief this time, but joy so pure it hurt. Thank you, she whispered. Thank Anna Garrett for raising a nephew smart enough to find me and brave enough to ride through the night to do it. Thank Silas Boone for having the courage to stand against corruption even when it cost him everything. And thank yourself for loving this boy enough to fight the whole world for him. The governor finished the forms and handed them to her. Welcome to motherhood, Miss Quinn. Legal, official, and unassailable. The next hours passed in a blur. Rangers took Eleanor Blackwood and Marshall Carver into custody, bound for trial in Silver Falls. The hired guns were rounded up and charged as accessories. Anna's trading post became a temporary headquarters as statements were taken and evidence was cataloged. Through it all, Mara sat with Eli, holding the papers that made him legally, irrevocably hers. The papers that said she was his mother, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the fierce determination to protect him no matter what it cost. Silas woke fully as dawn was breaking, his color better, his breathing easier. The governor himself came to speak with him. Mr. Boone, I understand you lost your home in this affair. Small price to pay, Silas said, though pain flickered across his face. The cabin had been his sanctuary, his carefully built refuge from a harsh world. Nevertheless, the territory owes you compensation. Your property was destroyed in service of exposing corruption and protecting a child. I'm authorizing a rebuilding grant, enough to reconstruct your cabin and replace what was lost. The governor paused. I'm also offering you a position as a territorial investigator. We need people who can't be bought or intimidated, who understand how corruption works in frontier territories. People like you. Silas laughed, then winced. I'm not much of a lawman. You're exactly the kind of lawman we need. Think about it. As the governor left, Mara approached Silas's bedside. You should take it, she said. The position. You'd be good at it. Maybe. He looked at her, at Eli sleeping in her arms, and something softened in his pale eyes. Or maybe I'll just rebuild the cabin. Make it bigger this time. Room for guests. Guests? Family, he corrected quietly. If you want. If you and the boy need a place. The deed's in your name anyway. Might as well put it to use. Mara felt fresh tears threatening. Silas Boone, are you asking us to live with you? I'm saying I built that place to be a home, and homes are meant to be shared. I'm saying I've spent 15 years alone in those mountains, and maybe that's long enough. He reached out and gently touched Eli's curls. I'm saying this boy needs a father figure, and I'm saying I'd like to try. If you'll let me. You saved us, Mara said softly. You gave up everything to protect us. Of course I'll let you. 3 weeks later, they stood in the valley where Silas's cabin had been, looking at the blackened ruins and the fresh-cut logs stacked nearby. The territorial rebuilding grant had been generous, enough not just to replace what was lost, but to build something better. We'll need at least 3 bedrooms, Mara said, sketching plans in the dirt with a stick. 1 for Eli, 1 for me, 1 for you. And we should expand the main room, make space for a proper dining table. 4 bedrooms, Silas corrected. He was still healing, his left arm in a sling, but he insisted on being present for the planning. In case the family grows. Mara looked up at him sharply, but he was staring at the horizon, his expression carefully neutral. Silas Boone, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we build a home that can hold whatever the future brings, he said. That's all. But Mara saw the faint color in his cheeks, saw the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, and she smiled. 4 bedrooms it is. They started construction the next day, working alongside hired builders from Red Hollow. The same town that had sold Mara for $5 silver now sent workers to help build her home, sent supplies and goods will, sent quiet apologies in the form of honest labor. Word had spread about what happened, about the corrupt guardianship scheme, about the governor's personal intervention, about Mara Quinn and Silas Boone standing against the whole system and winning. The story had taken on mythic proportions in the retelling, but the core truth remained. Sometimes, ordinary people had to stand up to extraordinary corruption, and sometimes they actually won. The cabin rose from the ashes over the course of 6 weeks. Not just a cabin this time, but a real house. 2 stories, solid and strong, with glass windows and a covered porch and a stone fireplace that could heat the whole structure through the hardest winter. Mara and Eli moved in before it was fully finished, sleeping on bedrolls in the main room while the upper floor was completed. Silas recovered slowly, his wounds healing into scars that he wore without shame. He and Mara developed a rhythm, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. He taught Eli to track and hunt and read the weather and the shapes of clouds. She taught both of them to cook properly, to mend clothes, to transform a house into a home. And gradually, carefully, something deeper began to grow between Mara and Silas. It started with small gestures, his hand on her shoulder when she was tired, her fingers brushing his when they reached for the same tool. Long conversations by the fire after Eli went to bed, talking about everything and nothing, discovering the people they'd been before tragedy and loss had reshaped them. One evening, 3 months after the cabin was finished, Silas found Mara on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Beautiful," he said, settling beside her. "It is." She leaned against him slightly, and his arm came around her shoulders as naturally as breathing. "I never thought I'd have this. A home. A family. Peace. You fought for it. You earned it." "We earned it," she corrected. "All of us together." Silas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about the governor's offer, the investigator position, and I'm going to take it. I'm going to. Not full-time. I'd still live here, still help with Eli and the property, but a few weeks a year I could travel to other territories, help expose corruption, protect people who can't protect themselves." He looked at her. "If that's all right with you?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because we're partners now. What I do affects you and Eli. I won't make decisions that hurt this family." Partners. Family. The word settled over Mara like a warm blanket. "I think you should do it," she said. "The territory needs people like you. And Eli should grow up knowing that his father—" She stopped, the word hanging in the air between them. "His father?" Silas prompted gently. "His father fought for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it cost him everything." Mara turned to face him fully. "That's what you are to him, Silas. That's what you've been since the moment you stood on that auction platform and refused to let me be sold for nothing." Silas's eyes shone suspiciously bright in the fading light. "And what am I to you?" Mara thought about all the careful distance they'd maintained, all the unspoken feelings they'd both been too cautious to name. She thought about the life they'd built together, the battles they'd fought side by side, the future they were creating one day at a time. "You're the man I love," she said simply. "If you'll have me." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. When they pulled apart, he was smiling, a real smile, open and unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. "I've loved you since the day you refused to run," he said. "Since the day you stood beside me with a rifle in your hands and fire in your eyes, and made them understand that some things are worth dying for." "No more dying," Mara said firmly. "From now on, we live. We build. We love. Deal." They were married in the spring in a simple ceremony attended by Anna Garrett, Governor Marshall, and half of Red Hollow. Eli stood between them, holding their hands, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. The town that had once measured Mara's worth in silver coins now celebrated her as a hero, as a woman who'd stood against corruption and won. The territorial newspapers ran stories about the scandal, about the dozens of children who'd been illegally sold through forged guardianship papers, about the reform laws that were passed in the wake of the investigation. Eleanor Blackwood was sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. Her husband got 15. Marshall Carver turned state's evidence against the network of corrupt officials and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. The clerk who'd forged the documents disappeared before he could be arrested and was never seen again. But for Mara, the real victory wasn't the convictions or the reforms or the justice that had finally been served. It was the sound of Eli's laughter echoing through their home. It was the feel of Silas's hand in hers as they worked in the garden. It was the knowledge that she'd taken a child the world had discarded and given him a family, a future, and the absolute certainty that he was loved. 1 year after the battle at the trading post, Mara stood on the porch of their home, their real home, built on love and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to accept injustice, and watched Silas teaching Eli to ride a horse. The boy was 5 now, taller, stronger, with a smile that came easier than it once had. "Mama, look!" Eli called, and she watched as he trotted the gentle mare in a circle, his face alight with pride and joy. "I see you, sweetheart. You're doing wonderful." Anna Garrett emerged from the house, carrying a basket of fresh bread. She'd become a regular visitor, a grandmother figure who brought wisdom and sardonic humor in equal measure. "You've built something good here," Anna observed, watching Mara watch her family. "Something that matters." "We all did," Mara said. "Every person who stood up, who refused to let corruption win, who chose courage over comfort. This isn't just my victory. It belongs to all of us." "Maybe so. But you were the spark that started the fire. Never forget that." Mara thought about the auction platform, about standing there worth nothing in the eyes of the crowd. Thought about Silas stepping forward with $5 silver and changing everything. Thought about the long road from that moment to this one, paved with struggle and pain, and small victories that added up to something larger than any of them could have achieved alone. "I won't forget," she promised. "None of us will." As evening fell, they gathered for dinner. Mara, Silas, Eli, and Anna, with Governor Marshall and his wife joining them as honored guests. The table was crowded, the conversation loud and warm, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable bickering of people who'd become family through choice rather than blood. After the meal, after the dishes were cleared and Eli was tucked into bed with a story and a kiss, Mara found herself alone with Silas in the room they now shared. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. She thought about the question, about all the definitions of happiness she'd once believed in. Security, comfort, the approval of society. None of those had brought her here. What had brought her here was love and courage and the willingness to fight for what mattered, even when the odds seemed impossible. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "And it's not finished yet. There's still so much to do, so much to build." "Then we'll build it together," Silas said. "All of us, for as long as it takes." Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent under a sky full of stars. But inside this home, this carefully constructed sanctuary built on the ruins of injustice, love lived and thrived and promised a future where no child would ever be measured in silver coins again. Where no one would ever be worth nothing. Where family was defined not by law or blood, but by the fierce determination to protect and cherish each other no matter what the world demanded. It was a small victory in a vast and often cruel territory. But it was theirs, bought with blood and sacrifice and love that refused to quit. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.